Dan Illman, Ashley Mailloux, big card at Prairie Meadows on Saturday, including race number 8. This is the Iowa Derby for 3-year-olds going a mile and a 16th. Let's take a look at the field. Nice to see a big field in here. Should be an excellent betting race. And it's a very important race for the number 9, Just a Touch, who ran so well in his first 3 starts for Brad Cox. And maybe the Kentucky Derby was shooting a little bit too high too soon.
Maybe it was. And it's funny, a lot of people loved him off of the Bluegrass performance. He took a lot of respect, 11-1 in the Kentucky Derby, but just never fired. He was mid-pack early on and sort of dropped to the back. And we haven't seen him since then. But the good thing is he has been training consistently since then. You can see 5 published drills, the last 4 kind of spaced out pretty well down at Churchill Downs. And this barn, they ship for, intent. They've had 1 runner at the meet. They've won at Prairie Meadows, and just kind of have to watch these connections everywhere they go. They do spot their horses quite well.
And you're right, the source just didn't get forward in the Kentucky Derby, and that was his running style for his first 3 starts, and that's the running style our friends at Timeform US expect him to utilize on Saturday. Just a Touch might be able to make the lead in a race with a fast-paced scenario. The key to the pace is the 2 Kitty Hawk, who's also cross-entered on Saturday at Horseshoe, Indianapolis. If Kitty Hawk decides to run there, it makes Just a Touch's life a touch easier.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that, it's tough. We're not trainers, Dan, but you look at Kitty Hawk in the 2 spots. I'm really not sure which one is the better spot of the 2. I mean, there is a shorter field at Horseshoe Indy, but still pace in both races. We know this horse is a little bit of a speedster, and sort of what we've seen so far wants to be forwardly placed. So you can see some others in here. I don't think we'll be too far off of it. I think even a horse like Henro, who's a kind of mid-pack in Timeform, the pace projections, I think he could be a little bit closer. He is coming out of those 1-turn races at Churchill, and they're not 1-turn miles. They're 6.5 furlongs, and prior to that, 6 furlongs at Oaklawn Park. So I do think the pace will certainly be at least honest here.
We'll start things off with the number 1, Mugatu, who was 5th in the Bluegrass, finishing behind Just a Touch. And then they tried the Preakness last time out, and it didn't work out. He was wired that day against some of the best 3-year-olds in the country. They're going to take the blinkers off. We know this guy's style. He's a 1-run closer, and maybe he gets the right setup.
Maybe he does. Maybe there's enough pace in here. It's interesting to see the equipment change, the blinkers coming off. He just never really made an impact over the muddy track at Pimlico. He's always towards the back of the pack, and that's where he stayed. But can't forget, his connections were hoping to get him into the Derby. He was kind of the next horse to get in, and he never got that call, right? He would have been the next one to be called up. And prior to that, his Bluegrass race, all in all, it's not bad. I mean, it's an okay race, and you look at the pace there, it was honest in terms of going a mile and 8. They did go almost 46 and change to the half. So I think there is a case to be made, and he's always been a good workhorse before his races, but he's got bullet drills coming into this at Belterra.
Kitty Hawk is the number 2. His only lifetime win came going gate to wire over what I thought was a speed-favoring track where he had a nice, easy lead. His 2 starts against winners, I guess you could make excuses for. First off of a layoff over a wet track at Keeneland. And then last time out, I thought he was on a deep and tiring rail when the outside was the best place to be. He's going to show speed if he runs here.
Yeah, and we kind of talked about this with the Indiana Derby. What do you make out of those 2 performances? Do you attribute to the 1-2 back, first off the layoff? Do you also contribute it to the off track? And then more recently, I thought maybe he didn't want to go a mile on a 3/16. But at the same time, sometimes horses do get to the lead in those races, and they can take them gate to wire. It just wasn't the case. He only had 1 rival behind him, and it was all said and done. Just looking at him and his figures, Dan, to me, there's some reservations about him. If you like him, you're certainly going to get a good price, assuming that he opts for this spot. But he hasn't shown enough stamina in those last 2. He hasn't even hung around for sort of the bottom of the exotics.
Note that he was listed as a vet scratch at Churchill Downs on June the 27th. The 3 is Henro, and as Ashley mentioned in the open, this guy is going to be stretching out around 2 turns for the first time. He's in very good form sprinting. Let's go back to his race 2 starts back. This is at Oaklawn Park. As you can see, it's a sealed, sloppy track, and he's going to rally from off the pace to get away from this field in the final 1/8 of a mile. And in his subsequent start over faster ground at Churchill Downs, he just missed to a horse that came back and earned a stakes placing with a 93 buyer.
Yeah, I thought this was a really nice performance at Oaklawn, given how the track was playing that day and sort of the fact that when we saw him win, he was closer to the pace than he was in that race at Oaklawn Park. So the big question for him, I guess, will be the distance. This isn't like he's coming from a 1-turn mile at Churchill. He's coming from 6.5, now has to stretch out around 2 turns. But I think based on his running style, it's always tough to pinpoint if horses like him can handle the stretch out and distance. I have a feeling that he'll be all right around 2 turns.
Tough to dismiss any Kenny McPeak trained 3-year-old in 2024, and Kenny's treated the number 4 Northern Flame like a pretty talented horse, running him right in the Rebel first start off of a maiden win, and the horse performed quite well, finishing third that day. I think he could throw out his synthetic race 3 starts back. That's not his surface, but his last 2 races just haven't been very good, especially the Matt win, a race where he made the lead, and he was all done after about 5 furlongs.
That's my biggest issue, is the Matt win itself. I think I can make excuses for the other ones. I can even throw out the Pat Day Mile. Sees the Gray, very impressive there. We know what he went on to do, but we're talking about a 1-turn mile. I just expect, and I think the betting public expected, that in the Matt win, he was going to take a step forward, and he was closer to the lead like we've seen from him in times before, but he just had nothing left in the tank in the stretch. So interesting spot for him to regroup. If you were, thinking about him maybe in January or February, I would say this is a great spot, but that last race left a lot to be desired.
Couple of locally based horses up next. The number 5 Atar is very lightly raced. This will be his 4th lifetime appearance, and he's done little wrong. He's hit the board in all 3 starts, including just missing in the local prep for the Iowa Derby. That was the Prairie Mile last time out, and that was a race where he tried to rally from off a slow pace, and he just missed. He needs a buyer boost, but he's so lightly raced, we can project improvement.
Yeah, certainly. And I think he really did nothing wrong last time out. Very different in terms of his trip, too. He was a little bit closer early on, and he had to battle it out in the stretch, and he just came up and nose short. So the one knock I would have on the most recent race is it wasn't a big field. I would have loved to seen 7 or 8 in there, and maybe him have to work out a little bit of a different trip. So maybe he was just better than the other 2 horses that finished behind him, but very close with the winner there. And the effort 2 back, I liked the trip that he got. So sometimes you can't necessarily toss the local horses. He's training well to get back to the races now. And, if I were to use him, it would have to be kind of at the bottom of my tickets at best.
Oki Clipper is the number 6, coming off of a maiden win at Prairie Meadows. That day, he was able to get close to the pace in a race where he was odds on. So it could have just simply been a situation where this guy finally found the right field in start number 4. It was nice to see him take the move forward in his first 2-turn effort.
Yeah, and I think that's probably a big factor of it too, right? Being able to be closer on the stretch out, the fractions weren't as quick, so he probably found himself naturally a little bit closer. But even 2 starts back, going 5.5, he was quite close to the pace. But he drew clear in there. He was a very nice winner. These connections do very well at Prairie Meadows, and another one who, is kind of looking for that local sort of hometown hero angle here. But I just wonder here, with all the pace signed on, where you look at a horse, say, to his inside, the other local horse, he could probably be a little further back. I think Oki Clipper does want to be more forward, and if the pace is hot, I wonder if that'll affect his performance.
The pace is expected to be quick, and the number 7 Next Level has the fastest time form U.S. late pace rating. While he may lack some of the upside of the others, he's already raced 11 times. He does have some credentials. He was 3rd in the Del Mar Futurity last year, and he's coming into this race off a good 3rd in the Matt win, finishing ahead of Northern Flame. He might get a better race flow than he did in the Matt win, and if that's the case, I could see him running late. To me, 7-2 is a little bit light, but he's a contender.
7-2 is a little light in the fact that he's 1 for 11 in his career, and I know he's picking up those minors, but he just reminds me of some of those classic horses that they have so much work to do late, and that's why they're only cracking into, say, 3rd or 4th in those races. And that's kind of been his story. He's been 3rd in those last 2. He's been further back. It's tough. It's 7-2 on the morning line. If you're trying to price shop, I don't think he's probably the value in this race to use on top. But his numbers certainly are very strong, and it wouldn't be shocking to see him win. But for me, with just the maiden score under his belt, the big thing to note, gate to wire, and the fractions were pretty leisurely.
The number 8 Datic, well, both of his lifetime wins have come over wet tracks, but he ran just fine in this race. The Texas Derby last time out at Lone Star over a fast track. He was 4 wide and in between horses on the backstretch, made a strong move to the lead. He's getting a little bit drifty here in the stretch, and the favorite is going to run him down. That favorite's a pretty nice horse. We're going to see him at Horseshoe Indianapolis this week.
Yeah, maybe you'll time the races out. Make sure you see how EJ Won the Cup does. I thought this was a really good performance. These 2 were simply much the best in this field. It was a big field. You go down the page. I loved his win at Oaklawn Park over the slop. I mean, he's been a very good horse. I mean, his 2 poor efforts came in the Rebel, they came in the Arkansas Derby. And maybe there's various reasons for it, or maybe he's just not necessarily that caliber of horse. But I do think the improvement that he's taken in those last two, they made a difference. It's also worth noting his two bad performances. He was wearing blinkers, and those were the only times he's had them on. So maybe it was the equipment as well. But I think he's taking the right steps forward, and he's just getting better with each start.
Just a touch. His son, a Triple Crown winner, Justify, looked so good, winning his career debut, going 3/4 of a mile over a sloppy track at the fairgrounds. And then I thought he was very game to finish second against Deterministic over an extremely wet racetrack in the Gotham. The Bluegrass was up next. First time around 2 turns, and we watched Just a Touch. He's involved in between horses from the start. There's no disgrace finishing second to Sierra Leone, one of the best 3-year-olds in the country.
No, this is probably for me the performance from like, okay, we got a good racehorse here. And that's using Sierra Leone as a gauge, but also looking that, he's going to still try to dig deep here and still doesn't really want to let Sierra Leone go by, but he's just overmatched and overpowered by the other runner. So his Derby performance, I personally, I would just draw a line through it. It's the
Yeah.
Derby, and this is a spot to regroup. They've decided to regroup a couple of months later than trying to rushing him back in the entry box and finding a spot. And this is an angle that works well for the barn. He has that early foot. He could be on the lead, but he could also sit just off of it. I think with post 9, Florent Giroux is going to have those options, and they'll just kind of play the break and see where it goes. But you can't argue when he has the best figures in terms of the 3-year-olds in this field.
96 Spire, 2 starts back in the Bluegrass we just showed you, and he should be right in the thick of things when they turn for home. Save the Trees is 2 for 2 in his career for trainer Michael Maker, living up to that pretty gaudy purchase price. Son of Preservationist, selling for $335,000. I thought he looked good last time out at Churchill at 6 furlongs, although it looked like there was a fast pace in front of him to rally into. One of the also-rans came back to place with an 81 Beyer speed figure. Now he gets the 2-turn test.
Yeah, and you talked about the big purchase price. We see these horses when they win on debut at Keeneland, whether they're 2 or 3-year-olds, they can attract a big amount of money, and that was the case with him. And I thought it came down to the way that he broke his maiden, rallying from off the pace, from dead last, circling them, getting up in time, and then to see him actually back that up with another good performance, I think is what you would hope for, right? Especially when you're paying $335,000. But it was a similar performance with that sort of running style. It's going to change now. It's going to be a different ball game going to 2 turns. I don't see 2 turns necessarily being an issue, but I don't think he'll also necessarily be last early on like he has been in some of those races, right? I think because he's going to stretch out, the pace we're hot in both of those, maybe we're going to see what he can do from mid-pack.
Completing the field's the 11 Cascade Cruiser. This guy's really put it all together ever since blinkers were added to the equation and he shipped up to the easier confines at Hawthorne Park. He was very game last time out, rallying off of an opening quarter of 25. That's a slow pace. He came from last to win. He beat a couple of next out winners, and the 4th place finisher came back to win with an 82 Beyer. He's getting better. This is a big class quiz from a tough outside post.
It is, and he was part of that dispersal sale. They picked him up for just over 100,000. So Louis Russell, not afraid to take a shot with him here. I thought his maiden score was very impressive, and then you look at the following race. Maybe it was more impressive. I know his figures took a step forward, but the pace was certainly slower when you look at the opening quarter and you look at the half. I mean, we're talking about almost a second difference to the half, and he was further back, and that's why I think he just got up just in time. I think it had to do with that slow pace, and it's very tough to close on a pace like that. But it's going to be different. First time to Prairie Meadows, and it's going to be a class test. But that's kind of the similar story for all of them, right? A lot of these horses, especially the local horses or some of these horses with limited race day experience, this is kind of their next step forward to see what they're really made out of.
The Iowa Derby kicks off a 50-cent pick 4 at Prairie Meadows on Saturday evening, and it could be a nice stepping stone to some of the major 3-year-old stakes races in the second half of this year. Let's take a look at our top selection. We both like Datic, and I think you made a very good point about him. When he was in those graded stakes races at Oaklawn, he had blinkers. Steve took them off. The horse seems to have improved, and that last figure puts him right in the mix.
Absolutely. And I just think the way that he did it, yes, he gets beat by EJ, won the cup, but these two are simply much the best in a big field. And a couple of those other horses will be participating in races this weekend at Horseshoe Indy and other places. So I just think the way that he's been able to take a step forward, even in his first start without the blinkers, I know he was just 4th and he was favored, but he had a ton of trouble in that race. So to me, he's just getting good at the right time. And I don't know if we'll get 5-1 like it is on the morning line, but I think to me, when you looked at the 7, the 8, and the 9, and maybe the 10 as the logicals, he is the right horse, I think. And anything close to that, I think is a great price on him.
Adjusted Touch is the horse to beat if he runs back to his bluegrass, but he's going to take a lot of money in here. Datic is in very good form. You like Next Level a bit. I could see this horse closing very strongly in the stretch if the pace is hot. 8793 for Ashley, 8379 for me. Nice edition of the Iowa Derby on Saturday at Prairie Meadows. Good luck.